Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to my Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. I'm talking to Jordan Myska Allen, and we're going to talk about circling, or as he calls it now, relatefulness. How are you, Jordan?
I'm very happy to finally be on the show.
I've known this man for almost 9 years, and we both discovered this practice called circling at the time, and it's something that seems like it only happens in Austin, but it has been in other cities, and I think it's maybe a good strategy for healing some of our relationship divides in this country, but we'll see what happens. How are you, Jordan? Yeah. So how did you get into this practice, Jordan?
Yeah, it's a good question. Originally through integral theory, this Ken Wilber kind of philosophical attempt to actually integrate a bunch of different points of view. I went to a conference, and I think it was 2012 in Boulder, and there were some guys there. It was Decker and Robert, and they led the practice, and I was like, this is really cool. This is like meditating with conversation.
Yeah. And Decker Kunov and Robert who?
McNaughton.
Okay, I don't know who that is. Interesting enough. Yeah. That's the what's the name of that? That's the Boulder Circle. What's the name of that institute there they have in Boulder?
Yeah, the Integral Center.
The Integral Center. Yeah, so yeah, they're in Boulder. Yeah, which is also another town that's centered around a large college. So,
right,
where people are also very outdoorsy. But yeah, so. Right. And so you got into that, and I know there's also there's the Art of Circling with Guy Sengstock. He has his own training track, and then there's also what's called Circling Europe.
That's right.
Can you tell where exactly did circling get started?
My understanding is that Guy Sengstock and a friend of his named Jerry Candelaria were out at Burning Man, probably doing some sort of drug. And they went out into the playa, which is like the deserty area. And they started relating in a way that felt, it was probably like 1997, 98, something like that. And they related it in a way that felt different. And they're like, what the hell was that? And they kept trying to like point to like, what was that thing and how was it different? And over time, they tried to mix in a bunch of stuff. They mixed in all the influences we see now, T group, mixed in AA, mixed in men's group type stuff. And they were like, oh, that's not it. Oh, that's a little bit it. And over time, they just kind of, this new thing kind of formed up, which is, as we were just talking about, hard to say what exactly is it. But basically, a simple way to say it is being present in conversation. So
yeah. There's definitely aspects of being present, and you get little parts of and maybe being present in a different way. And and what was your definition again? It was meditation with conversation, you said, or
being present in conversation. And of course it's hard to describe. It's kind of like anything. If you've never seen the ocean and somebody tells you it's incredibly vast and deep, and you're like, what? It makes no sense. But there's a unique quality of relationality, which is kind of why we went with relatefulness, relateful mindfulness, or relational mindfulness. And there's a quality of like, normally when somebody says, hey, let's be present, you're like noticing space, or you're noticing a candle flame, or your breath, or maybe even learning to notice things inside your own body. Like I notice I'm talking fast, or there's tension in my heart. And what we do that's different with circling and relatefulness is we say, okay, that's included, but let's also include the other person. What do I imagine that it's like for you to be Chris here? What about our listeners? And what's our we like? What's the Chris Jordan field like? And we get just as curious about that and willing to name that, what it's like for us to be together, as we do to name our personal stuff.
Yeah, what it's like, to wear this shirt. How do my feet feel when I'm talking to you? It's very, and I think also it probably makes us aware of what our blind or deaf spots are.
That's right.
And you don't realize this until you're older, but one man's blind spot is another man's obvious, and one man's obvious is another man's blind spot. And if more people realize that, I think we'd have a lot less. I think we'd get along a lot better.
I totally agree. I totally agree. I mean, there's a huge invitation in this practice into humility, and you're right. Like that's something I'm passionate about. It's this kind of online dialogue. There's even less humility, less willingness to admit that we all have blind spots, and they're obvious to each other, but not to ourselves.
Yeah.
And so you see that increasing polarization that you mentioned.
Yeah, and one thing is, if you don't have a circling community in your area, you can do circling online. There's that's a Circle Anywhere now, and some other things there. So if you don't have a real live circling, there's still not that many. There still aren't that many large circling communities, I don't think. But but hopefully that will spread. Maybe this will become as big as Toastmasters.
That'd be awesome. I would love it. So yeah, basically, and that's part of my journey. Is I got into it and started leading here in Austin. Didn't even realize there was training or anything. I just started learning by screwing it up over and over again. And then I realized, like, man, there's this huge opportunity to do it online, because exactly what you're saying. There's tons of people who want to play that don't have access in their hometown. So I started this online. I started Circle Anywhere, which we now call the Relateful Company. It's larger umbrella. So you can go, it's on relateful.com or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's amazing because now there's, hundreds of people doing sessions every single day in every time zone. It's pretty wonderful.
Yeah. Every time I go, I haven't been on Circle Anywhere in a while, but every time I go on Circle Anywhere, I always want to ask, where is everybody? Because first of all, I want to know what time. I want to know, okay, it's morning here. Is it morning there? Or, because I do think that's important to know,
It's crazy. Yeah, it's so cool. You got people in Europe that are 7 hours ahead. You got people in Asia that are sometimes India is like 12 and a half hours ahead in certain places. There's all this. It's crazy.
Yeah. I don't know why India does the half-hour thing. I think that's really annoying. If they would just pick 1 hour either earlier, it would be a lot easier for everybody, but also with some of these calendar and appointment systems, it does all that work for you. But yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I believe there is it always in English, or is there some in Spanish going on?
We have some in Spanish as well. And that's, Liz and Philip Watson, they're now training people in Spanish. So we have a whole facilitator training happening only in Spanish. It's amazing. I speak Spanish very well, but, especially with them in the room, it's very helpful. So I've gotten to show up once a month and lead a guest session. And it's so touching. It's so beautiful to see. I learned so much practicing in a different language and seeing what transfers over and what's kind of idiosyncratic to English. And it's just beautiful.
That is, and and it's interesting too, when you go to a second language, you you become so much more patient with everybody.
Right.
Yeah. It almost as if it gets to a point where you do have a different mindset. Sometimes when people get online, you're not on the internet very much, but sometimes when people start getting obnoxious with me on the internet, I'll just start responding I'll start making jokes in Spanish and it's like, once I go to that language, I take on almost take on a different personality sometimes. And I'm not fluent though, but it's.
And did you learned in your adulthood, right?
Spanish?
Yeah.
Well, I learned some in high school. That's something, and unfortunately, that's something that wasn't really easy to do back when I was growing up. If I had kids nowadays, I'd probably by the time they're 5 or 6, I would encourage them to go get something else. And with you, it'll probably happen naturally. Your kids will probably say, "Daddy, what's that? What are those people saying over there?" And that's the door. That's the door.
Yeah.
Or just take them somewhere. And then when they're ready, and the thing is, especially little kids, when they're ready to dive in something, give them all they want.
Right.
Because little kids they often binge learn.
Right.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah.
Well, we're lucky. Stephanie is half Brazilian, so her mom's side of the family lives in Brazil, and they come and they speak Portuguese, and so Jack's already gotten to get exposed to a bunch of Portuguese. She tries to speak to him in Portuguese as much as possible. So hopefully our kids will grow up bilingual.
Yeah. Easy access to second citizenship, Jordan. Go for it. But
Yeah.
I do wonder. I won't be shocked if with mass communication, some of these languages maybe fuse back together.
Right.
That maybe in 100 years we won't have Spanish or Portuguese, but we'll have something that's and maybe it'll just go back to Latin. But
I imagine that there'll be fusions, but they'll be kind of new.
yeah.
Like, we joke about Portuñol is like Portuguese, Spanish mixed together. And it's almost like all like the languages are having babies too. And so, I think we'll have Spanglish will be its own like kind of language, or maybe you'll have like Southern Spanglish and Texas Spanglish and all kinds of different new forms.
Well, I can imagine. Yeah. Also, you just have we know we have the different American accents. I can imagine there's got to be Brazilian accents, and certainly there's Spanish accents and dialects as well. But
that's right. Yeah. We got Portugal and Brazilian Portuguese and Cabo Verde or Mozambican Portuguese.
Yeah, we're going way off here though. So let's get back to circling. So
yeah.
So as I said, there's several different schools of circling. There's Circling Europe. There's the Integral Center, and there's a Art of Circling. I guess is this would you consider what you're doing right now maybe a fourth school of circling or?
Yeah, and definitely, and partly that's why we went ahead and changed the name to Relatefulness and being relateful.
Yes.
Was because we are doing something a little bit different. Each school has their own flavor, a slightly different way of doing things, and now, of course, they've got a trademark, and these are like legally defined as this school and that school and the other school. So we're the relateful school of circling. Or I mean, some people, I think we're still figuring out how to use the term, but a lot of people like to think of it as like relatefulness is this kind of larger field of being present in relationship, and circling is one practice of how to be relateful.
Yeah, and I have to admit, even after almost 9 years, if you dropped me into one session or the other, I don't think I could tell the difference.
That's beautiful.
But you probably could.
I could, yeah, I could. And it's one of those things where maybe in the future, it's kind of like languages, as we were talking about. There's different accents. And so in the future, those might become totally different schools. But right now, the differences are more only people like us care about the differences. Like the average person is just going to go and be like, wow, this is really different, really cool, get a lot out of it, and not care too much whether it's this school or that school.
Yeah, I don't think many people do. And I always tell people, go to circling at least 3 times before you judge it, because it's different every time you go.
That's right.
And you might not be having a good day, or somebody else might just be having a bad day. And one session, if you don't like one session, you may like another. I mean, I always go to circling with no expectations about what's going to happen. I mean, I have a general expectation of who might be there, but other than that, I just kind of let it go. It can be very liberating.
I think that's so wise, and I can see that in the way that you show up, and I really appreciate that. And it's one of the things that I think we're trying to train, is that attitude of showing up without expectations, because the expectations kind of get in the way of presence. So you're just there. You're actually there, seeing what's here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Where do you? And maybe the thing that's interesting about circling is, I've seen people get emotional, but I've never seen a fight. I've never seen, and I can't say that there's anybody that I can't think of any two people in the circling community who walk out really hating each other. I mean, there seems to be a recognition that everybody here is, part of the same species, and we all have these same struggles, and that we all have some things in common, and that we can at least appreciate those things.
I think that's generally right, and it's part of why I think you and I both just love practice so much, is seeing that and seeing that common humanity, seeing people that normally might argue about some political position come together.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. There are some occasions where people, it's not perfect, right? I mean, people do get upset with each other. Emotions get really high and hot. And sometimes people think, oh, well, this is an excuse for me to just say whatever I want to say. So I actually wasn't there. I think this is part of what good facilitation does. But I've heard of a circle, for example, where somebody said something that was basically racist towards Jews, I think, and that just hit such a hot button for the person that that received it, and that they kind of like that was like a regular circle that broke apart. They didn't circle together anymore, and I don't think they ended up hating each other, but it certainly was like never fully resolved.
Yeah.
And that can happen because people are really, we're opening the space to be more honest, and you can make mistakes, like thinking honesty includes racist comments. But I think this person didn't mean to be racist. They didn't know. And it just triggered a really, really deep hotspot.
I don't know how this is something that's really bothering me now is, and I hope circling can be maybe an antidote to this, but what I would call victim culture.
Right.
And I was on a board, and I said, well, I said, well, there was a female on this website, and somebody said, well, using female and male as a noun is offensive. And I'm like, what? and and the main reason why I said female is because I didn't know the age of the person I was talking about, and if you think about it, because some people say, well, if you call a woman a girl, that's offensive, or if you call
Right.
a girl a woman, that's offensive. But if I say female, that encompasses all ages. And I just thought, we're at this point though where sometimes we always feel like we're walking on eggs,
Yeah.
and because I don't think we've ever really had an issue that I know of where anybody's just been, kicked out of circling.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean,
Right. There's interpersonal
yeah,
tensions that
yeah,
can get hot. But yeah, we basically find a way to work with whatever's here.
yeah,
And there is, I mean, like, I think you're absolutely right. There's a victim culture that is not going to be healthy, most of all for the people who feel victimized. Like, there's a chance
yeah.
to claim a lot more empowerment. And of course, that's not an easy thing to do, especially if there's certain, I mean, we all have, like you said, we all have these blind spots, and sometimes that's around these things that have happened to us that make it really hard for us to find that empowering way to step up. And hopefully, with our practice, we're equal parts challenging and supportive, so we can challenge the narratives that don't really help people, and support people being seen, being held, and stepping into more true empowerment.
Certainly, feeling empowered. Yeah, because I think a lot of people who, if you feel so disempowered that you just, I think prejudice is a lot comes from feeling disempowered. And I remember the rule from the authentic relating community, is to check your assumptions.
Right.
And you do end up checking a lot. You do end up checking a lot of assumptions when you go into circling. And I also think that circling allows, it really does empower people, because you see people who may be afraid. You really encourage people to talk, and you never see anybody go to circling and just be a fly on the wall. Well, maybe they don't come back, but usually they open up and say things. But
Right. Yeah. It's, sometimes they won't say a lot, or they'll be quiet most of the time, but when you talk to them, if you do ask them, they're like, wow, I was getting so much from that. And I want to say something a little bit more about that victim mentality or victim culture. it's an easy trap to then become like, for us to be like, oh, well, now we're victims of victim culture or victims of wokeism or something.
Yes.
And then we end up being the same thing that we're criticizing. And so the intent with being relateful is really to kind of, yes, we're honoring and acknowledging our relationship with each other and the fact that we impact each other. And then we're recognizing the place that we really have the chance to do anything at all is with ourselves and how we show up, how we make sense of things. So it's really practicing, like, it's not easy. It's not obvious. Like, let's say there's something happening in the room that I don't like. How do I change it? How do I make it into something I like? It's not that anything goes. I can't just be like, hey, everyone, like, stop what you're doing and do what I'm doing. I have to find ways of saying yes and.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and, which is kind of the rule of improv. By the way, Jordan, have you done any outreach to career counselors? I mean, I would just say to these career counselors that, do you have people who are really lousy at job interviews? Send them here.
I haven't, but that's a good idea.
Because that's another thing about circling. You're not going to learn circling from a book. You've got to go do it. That's
right. Yeah, you've got to do it, and it's part of it is like you get steeped in this culture of people doing it, and even if we were to write out the best practices and the general things, it's like you have to see each person's unique way of employing those to see how it might work for you.
Yeah. You see what might work for you. It's I think maybe people would have a little more confidence and a little more, it's definitely a component that changes. I think the beauty of circling is it seems like when these things do come up, they seem to work themselves out before people leave.
It's true. I mean, there's a kind of wild hypothesis that we keep proving, which is like, if you're willing to just stay present with it, not even needing to fix it, not needing to look towards how do we resolve this tension or how do we make these people get along or anything like that, just simply, can we be more honest about what's really going on? And let's just be present to it. And sometimes it's like being present to, like, for example, grief. We've been with that a bunch where, like, you've, for example, just had family members pass, and it's like, hey, there's no solving that.
Yeah.
We're just going to be with it. We're going to open our hearts and say ow together and feel that grief with you. And that's enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes you do just need to be with somebody. And sometimes part of being with somebody is acknowledging that you don't know what they're going through.
Right.
I don't think you knew this guy, but 4 months ago, I had a buddy who lost his identical twin brother, and I'm just like, at 27, and I just said to myself, I cannot possibly understand what this guy is going through.
Right.
There is no way. I mean, I've lost my parents, I've lost a brother, but grandparents, but I said nothing can compare to this. I mean, probably not even a marriage, losing a wife or a husband compares to this.
Yeah.
But I said, I could still just be there and listen for people, because there is this temptation to listen with the intent of responding instead of just listening. I suspect we do that when we're little kids, but then we maybe grow out of it as we get more knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. And we think we have to respond, or we think we should, or we're trying to cover our own insecurity. And yeah, you're absolutely right. It's just that willingness to just receive someone and be with them as they are. It's actually a rare gift to offer people.
Can you tell us about a situation in your life in which you outside of circling, but where you had something going on, and you maybe you circled them or something like that, and it worked out? I mean, how'd that work out for you? Because
totally, let me come right back to that, because I want to say one more thing about what you said about with your friend with the identical twins. Like, there's something about what you just modeled, which is very much a circling or relateful principle, and that's being kind of humble or being in uncertainty. This huge welcome of uncertainty. Like, hey, I don't know, and I don't know if I can ever know what it was like for you. There's this deep acceptance of incompleteness, of like not enoughness. And there's this beautiful irony that we see over and over again in the practice of embracing that and saying yes to uncertainty, to mystery, to not enoughness, incompleteness is actually more holistic. It's more complete, and it's more loving, more honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just loved that. It was just such a beautiful example right there.
Yeah. People are really afraid to say, I don't know.
Right.
And sometimes it can create real problems.
Right.
It doesn't come up as much as it used to because everybody has, Google Maps on their phones, but asking for directions, people would rather give bad directions than admit that they don't know.
Right.
It's very frustrating. It's like, it's a, yeah, or just give a bad answer. And sometimes it is. I don't know where that fear comes from because again, little kids, it's
Right.
something, I wonder, now that you have kids, I wonder how this is going to work out. It's,
I'm super curious. I can certainly find in me, I've had to relearn how to say I don't know. Like there's some sense in me that I got some value, I got loved, I got praised for knowing things, for being smart, for getting A's. And so I
yeah,
learned that like, I've got to know. And then I think what happens today is as an adult, if I'm like, hey, I don't know, I'm afraid I'm not going to be loved or I'm not going to get praise. And it's usually the opposite, right? The more willing I am to say I don't know, actually the more people are like, oh, thanks. Thanks so much. Like it's so refreshing. Or now we know to look somewhere. Or if I pretend like I know and I don't know, then I'm not going to get praise. So yeah, I think that's where it came from me, but I think it's different for everyone, like why they feel like obligated to know. I wanted to come back to your question about like a real life example. I mean, for me, it's constant. It is like, just this past weekend, my wife and my wife is not a circler or a relateful person. She's just not that into that sort of thing. And so she's, you know, learned a lot from me just by osmosis, but never taken any classes or anything like that. And so we were getting, we've got this newborn, Cecilia's 5 weeks old. And of course, there's all sorts of tensions that come up. We're not getting enough sleep and, we get snippy with each other. And there was something where, I don't even remember what our disagreement was, but, I think what it was actually, I realized in myself that I thrive off of positive reinforcement. I just love when people tell me that I do a good job. And so I was like asking her, will you please tell me more often, like give me praise, just give me praise. This is what the Jordan character really likes this and thrives off this. So right there was like, this example of me realizing something in myself and being honest, being admitting it relationally, and then asking for it directly. And then she was kind of like, well, she's been invited into this context of open honesty with me. She's like, sometimes it doesn't feel authentic. I don't know if and so we just had this beautiful, honest conversation about how she could find a way to give me what I needed that felt authentic for both of us.
yeah. This brings up a question that often gets asked, and when you're circling, how do you deal with a question like, honey, does this dress make me look fat? Because it's one of those questions where you can't win no matter what you say.
Right. Yeah, totally. I mean, this is, yeah, exactly. The beginning circler will basically default to like radical honesty. And there's something about that is important for learning, but there's like a deeper honesty that's more in touch with what she's really asking. And the way I actually respond to that is probably something like, I'd probably be like, I think you're gorgeous no matter what you wear, and when you're not wearing stuff.
Yeah,
um, well, I don't know what. I'm not very good with this sort of thing. What do you think about that dress?
yeah,
So I kind of affirm or reaffirm what's true for me. I do think my wife is gorgeous, and like no matter what she wears.
oh yeah,
And then I put it back on her. And if she's like, no, I really need you to know, then I really need to know what your opinion is. Then I find a way to be more specific. I don't like, let's say, I might say, well, I might say something like, if I think the dress is like I like dresses that are tighter on you because they show off your figure more, and I think this one looks a little like a Mormon or something. No offense to Mormons here. But, if I try to find something, like, super specific and idiosyncratic to me.
Yeah, that's a good way. Yeah, interesting enough, Jordan. Has circling become somewhat of a singles thing? Because I tell people this is a social activity for adults that doesn't revolve around getting drunk.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if that happens, but it seems like to me it would definitely bridge some of these divides that we have in this country right now.
I think so too, and I would love to see more of it. I was just telling the team I had this fantasy of having, like, the studio being like a little cafe on the bottom, and so people come and they don't even realize, like, there's a second story where people are doing the practice, and they can, it's not secret or anything like that, but people come, they're like, wow, the vibe is just different here, and I wonder why. And then they slowly but surely, get more into the practice of because there's the honesty piece, but a lot of what you're speaking to about healing divides is the empathy or the compassion
Yeah,
piece. And it's something that it's really interesting. We communicate all the time, every day in our lives, and we basically get no training in communication, right? There's no, like, if you have any sort of communication class in school, it's usually how to give a speech. It's
yeah,
not about how to listen, how to be empathetic, how to understand what people are really saying, what's really going on for them, how to understand yourself, how to know what you're feeling, how to express your feelings. These are things that just basically aren't taught. If you're lucky, maybe more and more they're getting taught in maybe they're taught in Montessori schools or something like that. But for the most part, it's just not part of the standard curriculum for becoming an adult. And I think that a lot of what's going to, help this kind of polarization, like you're saying, is people being able to steel man each other's opinions and empathize and be like, well, if I was in that situation right now, if I had lived that life, I would exactly act the same way. And it's up to us, if we, for example, you and I notice this, people's tendency towards victimhood, like, okay, how can I empathize with that? Like, how, of course, I would step into that victim mentality. I've done that today. I do that with my wife all the time, and I'm working hard on how not to do that. Like, how do I not be, how do I be in a place of deeper empowerment? So I really kind of take it on for myself and find every time I'm being with somebody in a session, I'm finding where what they're going through is somehow reflected in something in my life as well. And then it's not even like I'm efforting to empathize. I'm just like, my heart's open. Of course, I feel what they feel.
yeah. It's definitely it's really yeah. I'm curious to know if these if have you ever tried circling for kids or circling for teens or something like that? I don't know how that might be very interesting.
I think it's a very fertile field that we've done it a tiny, tiny bit. I led a session for some high schoolers
Yeah,
um, years and years ago, actually at Casa de Luz,
yeah,
when we were there, and it was fun. It was interesting. They're a lot more, you know. I mean, this happens with adults too, but with them, like, their life is the social sphere. And so there's a lot more kind of like checking each other out of like, is it okay if I say this? Am I going to get cool points? Am I going to lose points? There's a lot more tracking status and belonging. But there's something beautiful about the honesty of it. Like, us as adults, we're doing that all the time too. We're just doing that, but I think doing it in a more mature way and going beyond that, tracking other things too. Are we listening to ourselves? Are we being in integrity? Are we autonomous? Are we sovereign? So yeah, I mean, I think as we get better and better at it, we will be able to bring it to more and more audiences, more and more age groups.
certainly. Yeah, and you know, I don't know how this might work with people, and yeah, if you tried any school in Austin, I'd probably try the Waldorf school, but
Yeah,
because
that's right.
of course Micah was there, and a few other people who've been involved with this were there. It seems, but Montessori, I don't know what Montessori would say, but there's a lot of great people in Montessori. Yeah,
And Montessori mostly is like very, very young, right? So Waldorf would be great because you could get a little bit older kids who can. But I mean, it's exciting. We've got a few. This is such a new practice. We've got more and more people parents that are raising children in this kind of relateful way. So we have like Philip and Liz Watson we talked about who speak Spanish.
Yeah.
They have their son Alexander. I've got my kids. There's just tons. Dagny, Lisa, like a bunch of my facilitators are bringing this into their parenting. And actually, Dagny wrote about it. We have like a little article on the Relateful website. That's beautiful.
Also, do you think this has probably, helped people break up in a better way? I mean, you've certainly seen couples in the circling community who have parted ways. I mean, or some like to say a conscious uncoupling. Which I love that term.
Yeah, I like it too. Yes, I think you're right. I have seen that. There's something about there's a kind of spirit of when two people are really honest with each other, the relationship becomes what it's meant to be.
Yeah.
And so people work through their stuff faster. Like instead of having a years long relationship with a lot of like kind of subterranean stuff that people are hiding from each other, it's like, well, we can get to a place where we're honest about what we can be for each other much more quickly, and then there's less pain and less heartache. And then a lot of times what happens is people are good friends. They realize they weren't meant to be lovers. They were meant to be friends.
That could be it.
Partners or something else.
And I'm also wondering how this would, apply to relationships that people are in when they really don't see other options. I mean, I do wonder if you've done any, because I think there's some churches would probably go for this. I could definitely see maybe priests or whatever incorporating these principles into marriage counseling or something like that.
I think it'd be massive. I mean, Annabeth's done a little bit in Memphis, but and I think Jason Minix has also done a little bit with some churches. Like it's just it's so small, it's so new. Even though we talked about Guy starting it in 1998, it kind of died down and then got reignited right around the time I found it. And there was this, like you mentioned, those 4 schools all kind of reopened around 2012, 2013. So it's just fresh, it's new, it's exciting. But another thing when you talk about conscious uncoupling is there's a kind of a buzzword now. We talk about boundaries a lot. But there's something really helpful and true about it. For every yes, there's also a no. And for every no, there's also a yes, right? If I say no to something, I'm saying yes to something else. So there's some sense in which we're practicing not just being able to be deeper in touch with ourselves and our feelings and with each other and the emotions of being in relationship. We're also being more in touch with our limits, the places where we're not capable of going on, or where, hey, this is actually not okay for me. And so when you're allowing that to be more present in a relationship, again, things just get worked out a lot faster. So, for example, I just was talking with a friend who realized that she wants to be a mom. She wants to have babies. And she was dating a guy who wasn't so sure about that. And so she really loved him. They had an awesome relationship. And it was really hard for her she's like, I don't want to break up. I like him, but I have to because he doesn't want kids. And I'm clear on that. And so you could say kind of conscious uncoupling that comes from having that boundary and that clarity and that willingness to be open and honest about, on her side, this is what I want. This is a deal breaker for me. And on his side to be like, you know what? I'm not ready for that. I don't know if I'm ever going to be ready for that.
Also another place, have you maybe seen how this could be applied to sports teams?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think actually has less people experimenting with. But I think it's, what I've done a lot is with executive teams and with companies where it opens, it's very vulnerable because you're kind of opening the aperture of communication. Like the bandwidth of what comes through gets wider and faster. And so it can feel really intense. So that's another example that happened to me recently with, I'm part of this startup that's doing basically in a way trying to bring this relateful mindset into online dialogue. But this conflict came up that was with me and one of the other guys, where we had this disagreement about an algorithm and the way it should work and everything. And it was intense. But we're being honest. He's like, I think I'm projecting my mom onto you. And I'm like, oh yeah, like this is my defense pattern around my autonomy. And it's really intense in that moment, but that means that we move through the disagreement, because what was actually going on was those projections and those defense mechanisms, not a content disagreement. And once we could move through that stuff, then we could talk about the content with ease. And that's actually what happened. So it's, yeah, I mean, that's exactly what would happen, I think, on a sports team as well. Is you'll get more intense things come up in the moment. Like you'll get, oh, well, this is a power struggle, or I want to be the superstar on the team. I want. But once you get that, everyone knows that already anyway. It's implicit. And so if you can, just making it explicit won't necessarily help, because you have to be able to work with it and hold it relationally. But if you can make it explicit and work with it, then man, the energy just flows. And suddenly all the energy that was moving towards like navigating that up subconsciously, we can now just set that aside and do what we do and what we love doing. So it's just like that. I'm really excited about seeing that now that you bring it up.
Yeah, that's definitely, because you sometimes end up with somebody gets traded because they didn't get along with people, or things like this happen. You end up with these egos. I think also, if you have, say, a group of, I'm cynical, but I feel like the corporate world is so litigious and everything. I don't know if this will ever work in that, just because you can't. Everybody's afraid to be honest, and you can get sued for being honest. Yeah,
it's a little bit of a different thing. So it's interesting. So what I noticed is, because of exactly that, there is so much low hanging fruit of like increased intimacy and increased connection, increased honesty. That doesn't lead into that dangerous territory of maybe I can get sued. So we can still keep things offline. Like, hey, we're not going to talk about sex. We're not going to talk about people's salaries, whatever. But let's bring a little bit more humanity forward. And actually, what I find is, if people try to bring authenticity into the workplace, it doesn't work, because people are like, hey, I don't want to be authentic here. I don't want somebody to use that against me. But if you say instead, let's bring honesty and compassion, where we're being honest about the fact that jobs are on the line here, and you may be competing with somebody for a promotion. Like, now with that context, let's be honest and let's see if we can bring more communication. People really open up and really warm up to that. They're like, oh, you understand me, you understand the risks that I'm facing, and you're accounting for those risks. Now I can bring more presence, essentially.
Well, that's why I said sports teams, because that's an environment where you don't really see suits for hostile environments or stuff like that. But in the traditional corporate, also, and maybe what would happen, if you might even apply this to soldiers going into battle.
Wow, yeah, that would be. Yeah. I love the way you think about this. It's just expanding the range of what's possible.
Yeah. How does this different from other things like, I'm thinking of neuro-linguistic programming, nonviolent communication, we mentioned radical honesty. How do you think, how do those things differ from this? And what do you think about those other things?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference, there's a million differences, right? But let's say like two big categories. The first one is relationality. So even though, say, something like nonviolent communication is a communication practice, it's still very individualistic. It's centered on what I need, what I'm noticing. It's a beautiful practice. It's incredibly helpful. We try to include it as much as possible, but it's very much I-centered. Like I when you do this, I notice this about myself. And it's very different to really bring in this kind of I thou feel of like, what's it like for us? What's our we like? What's our group like? And let me try you on. Let me empathize. Let me get a sense of, okay, so how is it to be you right now, Chris, talking on this podcast?
It's very comforting. I feel a little bit I'm feeling a little bit dry, but because I didn't drink enough this morning. But otherwise I'm feeling very into this right now. It's been it's very enlightening.
Awesome. So yeah, so I'm feeling warm hearing that, and then I'm also imagining what it's like to be you, to be a little dry, and also being like, yeah, I'm comfortable. This is enlightening. And so it's a different feeling to be like, okay, well, yeah, like, okay, now you're smiling. What do you notice coming up for you?
I guess I'm just noticing how easy it is to talk to you. You know.
Thank you. It feels wonderful. Yeah. What's it like? What's the ease like? Can you say more about that?
I'm not sure.
Right.
The ease, like, but that is another thing I can say about the circling community. Nobody's ever really let me down big in the circling community, which is nice to know. It's a few small ones, but it's been generally positive.
That's beautiful to hear. I mean, I'm just tickled. I like hearing all this stuff. It makes I feel really good hearing it.
Yeah. Where are there some other circling communities right now that are fairly active besides Austin?
You mentioned kind of the Boulder. Although the Integral Center shut down, there's still, I think, a lot of people practicing. There's the San Francisco Bay Area. We've got some of our facilitators. Brian and Josephine lead stuff at the Olympic. They're really active. And, of course, Guy has his stuff.
Yeah.
Joshua Zader's got a whole community in Tucson. We've got Philip and Liz, like I said, leading. They're actually mostly leading stuff in Colombia. There's a crew we've taught in Peru. We've got a bunch of people in Europe. So there's people in trying to think of where all they are. I mean, they do it a lot online, but in London, there's a ton of people practicing. There's a good number in Amsterdam. There's a good number in Belgium, in Antwerp, in the kind of like Northern European countries. Like you have like in Norway, in Gothenburg, Sweden, in Estonia also has a decent presence. So it's really spreading. Oh, there's a group in New Zealand as well. It's just kind of getting started and growing more. In Australia, sorry. Yeah. So it's all over, but it's all very, very small. Like, the Austin is probably the biggest, maybe the Bay.
Yeah, and so, you occasionally have immersions in Austin, and some people come to some people do circling online, and then they come to the immersions just because I finally get to see these people for real, and
that's right.
Go out to lunch with them. And I know you have some trainings also, which is also very enlightening. It sounds like it's grown a lot just in the last 9 years or 10 years.
That's right. Yeah, it really, really has. I mean, we started with Circle Anywhere, with probably 5 facilitators. And then, over the past, so I launched in 2015, I think. So, now we have almost 50 facilitators and that are working and leading sessions on the platform. And there's people just truly all over the world. And us, the Relateful Company being online really helped, I think, allow that to happen where people could grow and develop their skills and get practice, even though they didn't have a local community. And then eventually they could take trainings, like we have this online training, and then they could start a local community. So yeah, it's really grown. It's exciting and impressive. I honestly, you and I get to see each other a lot on these Monday nights here in Austin.
Yeah.
And I often am delighted just to to be like, wow, there's this many people that want to be present and honest with each other in this way and are willing to have the courage to go out and meet new people and be open and authentic. It's just beautiful.
Maybe there's just so many places in their lives where they don't feel like they can be that way. Although I don't, although I can't say, I mean, I do have some, I do have some rules about circling. For example, I will never talk about politics at circling. And, but other than that, that's about it.
Right. And I think that's what most people find. They have their own personal rules, and the personal rules aren't always the same, but it's a lot of times it's around like what are the things that lead us to more intimacy, and what are the things that lead us away from intimacy. So, you can talk about politics in a circle. It's possible. But for most people, it leads away from intimacy. It doesn't, it's not generative conflict, because we get triggered, we get lost in our heads, or we get lost in our bodies. Maybe we get lost in the trigger, right? Or we get lost in our emotions, and we forget to be present and empathetic with ourselves and another person. And so it's just an extra level of like, wow, let's say what are the British parties? It's Tories and
Tories, Labour. There's also Liberal, but those are the two big ones. Yeah,
Tories and Labour. So let's say I'm a Tory, and and somebody over there is espousing some Labour Party, stuff. Can I be like, it's much harder for people these days to step into empathy and be like, well, how could that make sense to me? And then to ask for the same thing, say, reflect them, be honest, find the deeper layers, and then say, okay, now I'd like to share some of my Tory party ideals and see if you can kind of get where I'm coming from, and reflect back that, like, what drives me. It's possible. It's just very, very hard. It's very hard. It's better if you can kind of build that intimacy over time to start dealing with more and more charged topics. But I remember, in Texas, for example, a hot button controversial issue was when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Instantly in Texas, there was this thing where now women who previously had a legal right in Texas to get an abortion, no longer had that legal right. And it came up in a circle. When that was happening, it came up in a couple of circles in these Monday nights where it was new people, and I was really impressed with the way that people handled it. It was beautiful. It was mostly people, we had a woman from Norway who didn't understand what Roe v. Wade was, didn't know what was happening. And so she was kind of confused. And then we had a man talking about his experience of never having a choice, and a woman crying and emoting and feeling like the loss and the grief. Another person who had an abortion and was regretful. It was just such a wide range of experience around this really charged topic, but people were being honest about it. People were sharing their guts, their hearts, and they weren't judging each other. They weren't trying to make political statements. They weren't telling each other how to behave. They were being with just the human reactivity to this change. And that's the potential that I sense and see is possible. It's like, wow, we're actually, there's so much more going on than these like ideological debates. And if we can touch that deeper layer, we feel that common humanity. And then we open up our hearts and start to love each other in a way that doesn't necessarily resolve the problem, but it allows us to work on the problem in a way that actually moves it forward creatively, instead of, just trying to beat each other or win in some way that puts each other down.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think sometimes do you sometimes when you approach a circle, it's like, how can I give everybody here a win?
Right. What a beautiful attitude. I mean, and that's the thing where ideally we're training attitudes you can bring to outside of the circle. Like when you're just hanging out, how can I give everyone a win here? Or when you're with your family in a charged political debate, how can I give everyone a win here?
Yeah. Jordan, let's imagine you've got a circle and you've got 5 high-ranking officials from Russia and 5 high-ranking officials from Ukraine, and we'll just assume they all speak English, but they probably don't. What do you do with that? You've got them for, okay, I'll give you 4 hours.
4 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. And they can't leave. Yeah.
Awesome.
Except to go use the bathroom, but or get a drink or something. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, first, I set some sort of context for, and the first thing I would do actually probably is to say we're not gonna solve anything here.
Yeah.
We're not gonna, or rather, we might solve things here, but we're not gonna aim for that because that's too much pressure, and probably it's not gonna happen anyway. So what we're doing here is we're gonna see if we can understand each other and understand where each other is coming from. And we start with one person at a time, like probably with Russia, honestly. And we pick one Russian and we say, okay, we're going to basically, do a focus session with this person for 25 minutes.
Yeah.
And then we do one Ukrainian. We do a focus session for 25 minutes. Mm-hmm. And then we talk about it. And we start to build this thread of common humanity. Look, here's a person that feels stuff. Look, here's a person that feels stuff. And then we kind of work outwards from there. Now, can we do a more open discussion, more like a flow? And we actually keep politics off the table at first. Like you said, we say, okay, just human to human. What's it like being here?
Yeah.
We work with that. And then for the last hour, we say, okay, now we've built trust, we've built rapport. We understand that each other is human. There are things we share. There's things we disagree with. Now let's open it all up. And this is assuming they can actually communicate well. If they can't, if there's too much vitriol, if there's too much hatred, we just keep it super tight, super structured. In fact, maybe we don't even do a circle at all. Like if there's too much hatred and back and we say, okay, we're doing an exercise where you literally have to do only active listening. You repeat back what they said. We really tighten up. And that's basically the deal. We're responding to the moment. We're responding to what's possible there. And if the possibility is like, nope, it's got to be highly structured, that's what we go with. Ideally, we move towards less and less, where it's a more and more open structure, more and more, let's see what's actually here and what wants to get known. Because what's actually here is so much wiser than my structured brain as an individual can control. But we may not have the safety for that. So we got to create it.
Yeah, I wonder if we might have to do several of these, but it would be very interesting to see where that goes.
I would love it, but yeah, I think we'd have to do several.
Yeah, and and then after that we'll send you to Armenia and Azerbaijan. We'll send you to Israel and Palestine.
That'll be the crown jewel is Israel, Palestine. Or that, or India, Pakistan.
Yeah.
Or actually, yeah. Then the crown jewel will be Israel, Palestine, and then the final test, the big boss will be North Korea.
With South Korea, yeah.
With South Korea, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what would happen with these. It's really that's the only one though where you have two that speak the same language. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
that just reminded me. You've mentioned a lot of places, but I don't think you said anybody about any this being going on at all in Asia.
It's pretty small.
Or in East Asia, yeah. I mean, and that's a huge market right there.
It's huge, and I would love to see more of it. We have one guy, Nitya Shanti, who was doing it in India for a little while.
But but I'm thinking China, Korea, Japan.
Yeah, basically nothing. We have one woman who now lives in Austin, was in Japan for a while. There's a few people, and I've led events in Bali and in Thailand, but a lot of that was expats. It's a huge, huge untapped market for sure. Awesome. That, and also the whole African continent. It's like there's a few people in South Africa. But man, Kageni, of course, who a mutual friend of ours, is
Yes.
excited to bring it to Kenya at some point. But
yeah,
yeah,
that would be great. Yeah, taking it there. I mean, yeah, it's definitely seeing. I don't know if there was any markets that would be more open to this or less open to it. It seems like it would. I don't really see why anybody would ever be offended by this practice or think that it's evil. But you might end up with some people who would say, "Oh, that circling things," and
yeah.
there's never, I can't think of any negative media attention that circling has ever gotten anywhere. I mean,
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think I can think of one. There's a guy named what's his name, Minchus Moldbug, some online blogger.
Curtis Yarvin, yeah.
Yeah,
Did he say something about circling?
he was offended by circling. He I don't know. I didn't. I think I just skimmed the article because whatever. But I think he dated a woman who was really into it, and basically my read is it sounds like he got hurt and felt like it was circling's fault. And I understand, people as they're learning the practice can be really vicious accidentally. They can be really, they think authenticity or means just saying whatever the hell comes across their mind, instead of that more kind of attuned, present-centered communication. And so, fair enough. I think, and it offends some kind of traditional sensibilities of that you should keep some things should stay between you and your whoever you marry, for example. But the thing about that is I think that's still true. You can be a circler and still keep things between you and your partner. You don't have to say anything. It's a constant in the moment inquiry of like, what is the kind of next, and almost like Frozen 2, what's the next right step? What's the next right thing for me to say?
Yeah. Yeah. What's the next right thing?
Yeah.
It definitely teaches you a lot of patience. I mean, and it's, I think you all do become more aware of what's going on. I mean, I often don't know. Sometimes I still probably have a problem. I just don't really know what my body is doing if I'm talking to somebody.
Right.
So, and I don't know if that's a disconnect or something like that, but it's something we all have. It's
yeah.
And certainly you've done well. And I was saying this years ago. I said Jordan's not a player, but if he wanted to be a player, he could be. It's. But now you're married, and you'll probably be married for 50 years. I mean, yeah. But it is interesting but it is good to know too that you don't have to be you don't have to be married to somebody who's active in the circling. But
that's right.
I wonder how the kids will react to it. That's going to be very interesting. And
I'm super curious. Yeah. I have the same wonderings. Yeah.
Do you think, Jordan, I got asked though, you've got a really great family. Do you think it's easier for somebody to come into this who has a really great family, or because some people are coming into circling and they've got really horrible families?
Absolutely.
It's kind of in the middle, it's
absolutely
people who come in with their trauma or, had, or more, I know people who've told horrible stories of molestation. Obviously we can't talk about who these people are, but
yeah, no, exactly. For sure. It's not an even playing field. People come in with advantages and disadvantages. And there's some people that have a much, much harder time. And there's a level of, we have a lot of space for that, but there's a level where, there's some adaptations that, if your adaptation to this kind of horrible childhood was to lash out at everyone, there's some sort of limit that we have where it's like, hey, you can't do that. You can't do that all the time here. So yes, it's harder for you. You have to follow different sets of rules because of this adaptation, because this horrible childhood. We can work with that, but you got to work with us too.
Yeah. The only thing sometimes I will see it happen and it hasn't happened in a while, but maybe just because everybody's gotten better at it, but I feel like everybody is ganging up on somebody and I will say something completely out of the blue just to distract it, just to stop it, because it's like, okay, we've got 5 people, because you don't, because sometimes you're circling people, but it gets to be a point where it seems more like it's just a gang.
No, exactly. And I actually love that about you. And I've used this as an example before. I think you're kind of doing a collective nervous system regulation.
Yeah.
Where like
you have to do that. Yeah.
I'm trying to think. One example, I remember one time we were at a training and this thing that you're describing was happening, and you were like, I've never seen these trees in Texas before, or something like that,
Yeah.
Like, I wonder if they imported these trees. It was so funny.
Yeah.
But it was beautiful. It was just like, we needed a breath as a group. We needed to calm the F down and take a breath. And we did. When you said that, it was just like, it was present. It was here.
Yeah. Well, when we had 2 guys, I won't say who their names are, but they both kind of got into it, They kind of got angry at each other. And then I just said, and you guys spent all that money on the Authentic Man program.
Right.
And they both done it together.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm glad you're bringing that up, because there's room for humor. There's room for play.
Yes.
It's so important. Like, yeah, exactly.
I think maybe because of my parents, I do feel this need to be the peacemaker.
Right.
I wonder if circling attracts a lot of people like that. People who want to play the peacemaker. You maybe end up with somebody who wants to. You might end up with an adult who just wants to get their parents to treat each other better or something like that. It's
for sure.
You either have couples who really want to treat each other well, or couples who really want to treat each other horribly. It doesn't seem to, but yeah. Yeah.
For sure. I think it does, and it's something we all have to work on, that sense of like wanting to protect each other and peacemake. And there's room for that too. But a lot of times, exactly as you're saying, it comes from a projection. It comes from that sense of wanting my parents to be happy.
Yeah.
Chris, I'm going to have to take off pretty soon.
I wanted to wrap up pretty soon too. Do you have anything else you want to say before we go? I'll put some links in the description. So.
Awesome. No, just a huge thank you, and an appreciation and a love for you for practicing for 9 years or more. And just like, it's beautiful we've grown so much. We've seen the community grow so much. And
I sometimes I've been thinking a lot about leaving Austin, but this is one thing that definitely keeps me here. Is the circling community. I hope it grows. I hope there's more going on. I hope we can get more people into it, because I think the world will be a better place because of it. And I've really got to look up this Yarvin article. I've got to see this. He's not a dumb guy, but yeah. No. Thank you very much, Jordan. It's been great having you here. Please follow, subscribe. Right now we're on YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble, BitChute. And of course, go check out my Substack and buy my novel, Escape from the Village. Jordan also has a novel, by the way, too. Yeah, I got to read that. What's that novel called again?
A Beautiful Apocalypse.
A Beautiful Apocalypse, and that's a novel that applies integral theory, and it's got a really great cover too. I got to give Jordan that, but yes. Okay, well, thank you very much, Jordan, and we are out.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, bye-bye.